In 2023, Pokemon Go made their most controversial change to the game ever. And no, I'm not talking about the Avatar update, which is a close second place. I'm talking about remote raids. If you've watched this channel over the years, you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum. But what I haven't gone into depth much on is the actual impact the remote raid change had on Pokemon Go. Bless you. Enough time has finally passed where we have actual meaningful data and we can see if Niantic was right in the choices they made over a year ago. First, a quick history lesson on remote raids and why they made the game the best game ever. During the COVID pandemic, we literally couldn't leave our homes. Everybody was stuck inside, and surely Pokemon Go would die because of it. Well, actually, due to a couple of key updates, the game thrived. The main update, remote raids. They allowed players to complete raid battles that were on their nearby without having to physically be after the gym. They allowed players to complete raid battles that were on their nearby without having to physically be at the gym. And after a few weeks of them being released, Pokemon Go made the Invite Friends feature available, which allowed players to invite up to 5 of their friends from anywhere in the world to their raid. Game-changing was an understatement. This turned Pokemon Go into a completely different game, one that could be grinded from home for the first time ever. And people grinded, including myself. In this time, I was able to catch some of the best Pokemon in my entire account, including BOOM! Yes! Yo! Yes! Oh my god, it's a Shundo! Wait! It's a Shundo! Oh, let's go! Wait for it. Dun, da, da, da. Let's go. Boom! Yes! Yes! Ladies and gentlemen, it has happened! This new update also brought some major streamers and internet personalities back to the game. The game was pumping and everybody was having a great time. Also important to note that during this period in the pandemic, Pokemon Go was experiencing its biggest boom in popularity since the 2017 release of Generation 2. And it lasted for a while. The game was absolutely humming until the Hoenn Tour of 2023 in February, which was a smash hit, particularly due to Rayquaza returning to raids, which everyone went super hard on. But then near the end of this incredibly hyped event, an announcement went live teasing an upcoming remote raid nerf, and we were worried. The inevitable then happened in April of 2023, and it was much worse than anyone could have imagined. Not only was the daily remote raid limit lowered from infinite to only 5, but the cost of the 3-pack bundle went from 300 coins to 525, and the individual pass from 100 to 195, pretty much doubling in price. When this change happened, the entire community was up in arms.
Yeah, I know this feels like a dramatic intro, but for good reason. We have some negative news to go through today. I'm still in shock taking this information in, but just know that, yeah, 5 remote raids a day now, and spend a bunch of money, spend like a lot of money on remote raid passes if you actually want to do it. It's pretty much not really a viable or really intelligent way to play the game anymore.
Basically killing the game as they intended it to be. There is nothing that can be done to delay this, to change it. Niantic is not changing their minds on this.
I'm genuinely shocked that it's 5. I thought it was gonna be more, honestly. I know that I don't raid a lot, but I still just thought it was gonna be more.
Raiding and remote raiding will never be the same ever again.
And we have officially entered a new era for the game, one that truthfully I'm not that excited about.
Everyone was pissed about it. Fast forward over a year later and here we are today with the same remote raid pass nerf, but a much different game. Now the question is, did it actually make that big of a difference? Well, I've got Niantic's financials and it's wild. First though, we need to understand why they made the change. In March of 2023, after the update had been announced, a veteran developer at Niantic sat down for an interview to defend their position. Some quotes from the interview include, "It's a big and meaningful change to a huge part of the game. So as you might imagine, for a change of this magnitude, we've of course examined many possible alternatives. After thinking very carefully about this, what we're doing is relatively simple. Generally speaking, the goal is to keep remote raids as part of Pokemon Go, but to do so in a sustainable way. The change is necessary for the long-term health of the overall game and our principles of getting folks outside and exploring the world together. The world has largely moved back outdoors and remote raid passes have come to dominate the overall experience of playing in a way we never intended. It's become essentially a shortcut to playing the game. We've seen an imbalance because the current price of remote raid passes is matched to the premium battle pass, which is distorting the game economy and making the game unsustainable in the long term. We know this is a big change and some folks will have a strong reaction to that. We're very empathetic to that reaction, but we really think this is the right thing for the overall long-term health of the game and our desire to make sure it's great for many, many, many years to come. So basically, Niantic saw how big of a change remote raids were having on average players' gameplay, and remember that they could see literally everything that you and I are doing on the game, including everywhere we're walking. So they probably saw a ton of people playing a ton, but walking around a little bit, or not as much. And they assumed that this fundamental change, the change being remote raids, would hurt the game in the short term and potentially kill it in the long term. But was killing the remote raids the actual answer? That's not what it seemed like Niantic thought they were doing. They stated, "There's a wide variety of folks who play Pokemon Go. Generally speaking, the number of people who will be affected by the cap on a day-to-day basis is a relatively small part of the total set of folks who play our game. It's often sometimes useful to ground what the median player of Pokemon Go is. It's something I talked about with the team all the time. The median player of Pokemon Go is probably someone like a Singaporean grandma who walks with her senior group for 30 to 60 minutes every morning as part of her exercise and social routine, who mostly focuses on catching Pokemon with her friends and maybe very occasionally or maybe not at all raids. The game balance and economics of Pokemon Go are now being dominated by remote raids in a way we never intended. And for a segment of the total population, this is fundamentally unsustainable. It constitutes a small part of the player population, but it's a player population we care deeply about as they are some of our most engaged players who have invested many, many years and much of their attention and enjoyment into this game. And it's important to make sure the game is balanced for all segments." It's really interesting to watch them like tiptoe around the word money or finances. Like, they've invested all of their attention and enjoyment into this game. They're talking about the big spenders who bought all the remote raid passes, myself included. But basically what they were saying here is that not that many people were completing more than 5 remote raids a day, if any remote raids a day. So this change shouldn't have made a big impact, which we'll look at in the revenue. And they also acknowledged that a small but mighty portion of the player base, myself included, was going absolutely buck wild on remote raids. And we were, and it was great. And these people were also some of the biggest spenders in Pokemon Go and some of the more important players for the company because of how much they spent. But still, Niantic felt like the advantage that these players were getting due to the remote raid pass not having a cap was too much, and the game needed more balance. And there's another cat now on the table. This one's different though. His name's Chester. Hello. Okay, well, he's just gonna be around, don't mind him. Niantic also said, Niantic is working to ensure that we are delivering on the promises of things like Elite Raids where we have meaningful, interesting, new forms of gameplay out there in the real world. With the launch of Elite Raids, we were able to see the impact and actually see many people come out again. Yes, it's not at the level it was in 2017, but one of the things that is really heartening to us is that when we look at the data, folks who are heavily engaged in remote raid passes, the vast majority of them are actually also engaging in Elite Raids and real-life experiences. In fact, the proportion of folks who raid remote raids exclusively as they play Pokemon Go and do not participate in some form of in real life activities are actually a very, very, very small portion of the total player base, and one we actually see decreasing quite a bit over time. The world has, I think, evolved and changed year after year from 2021 to 2022 to 2023, and we're seeing those changes in our players and their excitement to engage again in going out into the real world. The timing is in part because, yes, we've debuted these new features like Elite Raids. We've been able to see the impact they've had, and that folks are excited, even if they remote raid, to also go out there back in the real world. That's given us the knowledge and confidence that this is the right thing to do for the overall long-term health of the game. Ironically, semi-recently, it seems like Elite Raids were completely taken out of the game because they never worked. They were consistently buggy and broken. People didn't like them. So it's kind of weird. It's funny going back and reading these old interviews and being in the future now and yeah. Okay, so basically they nerfed the remote raids to give a level of balance and fairness to the game and to get people outside and adventuring and exploring, with the claim that this wouldn't really have that big of an impact on the overall player base. So let's look at Pokemon Go and some stats around Pokemon Go over the following months to see if this was true. When looking at this chart of the monthly live player count, you can see when the remote raid change went into effect. It happened in April of 2023, and in the following months, the game saw a noticeable decline in active players. So there was a pretty immediate drop-off of players immediately following this news and this change. You're looking at losing 1.8 million players in spring, a gain of 800,000 in May, then June through September, seeing another 4 million people lost. It definitely hit the game. Maybe not as hard as you think. And as far as revenue went, 2020 saw the highest grossing year ever at 918 million, which dipped down to 647 million in 2022 and actually back up to 689 million in 2023. So although the game wasn't doing as well as it was in COVID, it still saw more revenue in 2023 than 2022 despite the raid nerf. And actually when looking back at the active player data, the end of 2023 saw a huge increase in player activity which held fairly steady into 2024. So not only did the game bounce back from this massive change in nerf, but it continued to grow. And looking at revenue figures, the first half of 2024 has already seen $322 million in revenue, with the second half of the year always being the higher grossing portion of the year due to holidays and events and whatnot, which potentially means 2024, a year after remote raids were nerfed, could be the third most revenue grossing year in Pokemon Go's history ever. Speaking of 1 year after remote raids, in June of 2024, near the 1 year anniversary, Niantic sat down for another interview reflecting on the remote raid change. I will say what we found out after we made that change is exactly what we were hoping for. We've seen more in-person communities coming back together again. Those local communities are flourishing in a way that we haven't seen since pre-pandemic. As much as we want to give players that opportunity to use remote raid passes, we've decided that can't come at the expense of our mission for the game. That's something that's very cherished within the company at Niantic, and we felt like we've tried to strike as good of a balance as we can, thereby still offering players the ability to do remote raids at a limited rate. So overall, Niantic still maintains the decision 1 year later that nerfing the remote raids was the right decision. Now, back in 2023, I thought this was the worst change and idea that had ever been made and ever been implemented, and I remain true to that in a way. I still think that remote raids should have not been as nerfed as hard as they were, and I still think that they're too expensive, and I don't really use the feature as much anymore, but Niantic might have been right. When looking at daily player data for 2024, the game has completely bounced back. January and February saw the biggest boom, with the late summer months showing some super strong growth too. And again, the revenue from this year might be a top 3 of all time for the game. If we're looking solely at the data, it looks like not only has the game not died after the raid nerf, but it's actually doing better. And Niantic has gotten much better at releasing features that are in-person only without further hurting remote raids or other aspects of the game, like Dynamax battles and now shiny Galarian birds on the daily incense. It seems like overall, more people are playing the game every single day and more people are spending, which is a bit confusing for someone like myself who has played non-stop since 2016. For whatever reason, the game just doesn't feel the same as it did before the nerf. Feels less vibrant, less alive, less exciting. And many other players I've seen and heard express the same feeling. So why does the game feel sort of dead when statistically it's doing pretty great? I obviously can't speak for everyone, I can only speak on my own experience. And for me personally, the communities that I existed in were severely impacted by the remote raid change. And that's because I'm really only a part of the larger, greater, online Pokemon Go community, and I don't really interact too much with real life in-person communities. Mainly because I'm either spending all of my time making YouTube videos, or I'm at my company Mystic Rips, or I am with this beautiful woman over there. So all the people that I would interact with on a daily basis due to remote raids all kind of faded away. Also, a lot of my friends who are Pokemon Go OGs and OG creators who have been around for literally 8 years have started to kind of burn out a little bit, or just kind of do other things or focus on other stuff in their life. Plus, I also stopped raiding as much, and I stopped interacting with a lot of my my international friends. And the online social media side of the community, the YouTube community, and then all the other places, Twitch, TikTok, Instagram, all also seem to be really, really heavily affected by the remote raid change, and those communities have seemed to fade a little bit too. So my world personally was extremely rocked by the remote raid change. My world is not the only world. Everybody plays the game differently, interacts with different features differently, has different communities that they're a part of. And if the data's correct, more people are playing Pokemon Go now than they were right before the raids were nerfed. I just don't notice it because all of these new players aren't really a part of or joining into my niche specific community, which is the online community. So technically, to make the game feel less dead to me, I would need to go out and find new communities that are technically thriving after the nerf, rather than staying kind of just in my own community that has been severely impacted and kind of dying because of the nerf. That requires just a lot of time and effort and just emotional investment into going out and doing that whole thing. Using my hands a lot here. And I can't do that at the moment just due to life circumstances. And a lot of people have the same thing. It just, you don't have all day to go out and play a game and interact with people and stuff. Because at the end of the day, this is only a video game. And people are not going to uproot their lives completely to comply with the changes in updates and gameplay styles. And at the end of the day, again, there's gonna always be new people coming in and playing Pokemon Go for the first time, or coming back to the game for the first time in years. And many of these people will never know what the game was like back when remote raids were completely dominating and fun and were the only thing that everyone was doing. So the fact that the remote raid nerf happened won't impact them, or new players or returning players just won't even matter. As much as it pains me to say it, I think Niantic was right. I do absolutely believe that nerfing the remote raids as hard as they did ruined the game for a lot of people, myself included. It really killed my I don't really interact with the game the same way as I do since 2023, and I don't travel for it as much anymore. I'm much less interested and much less grindy. But I'm not the only person who plays the game. You know, it's also pretty clear that the game has bounced back just fine, and it's doing just fine. Granted, a game like Candy Crush has a lot of players, daily active users, and there's a lot of money being spent on it on a daily basis, but you don't go and wake up in the morning and you're like, wow, the Candy Crush community's thriving today. Like, you know, so either way, I'm open to being proved wrong in this case, and I feel like I kind of was. But what do you think? How does the game feel for you? Are you interacting with your local community? Do you notice the game feeling more fun and thriving, or has it always felt weird since early 2023? And the big question is, where will the game be in a year from now?